one of the events for the celebration
I
of the
see.
60th anniversary of the formation of the biochemistry unit.
60th
I
anniversary.
haven't been able to get to the history nationally, but I'm pretty sure that's probably one of the oldest biochemistry majors in the country. Okay, and yeah, and certainly before Harvard, Yale, Princeton, before they had biochemistry majors. And thanks to some sleuthing that Professor Burke did, turns out the first biochemistry course taught at Smith College was in 1914.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the Journal of Biological Chemistry was just founded in 1905. So we're really ahead of our time. So this obviously is the panel discussion, but I want to remind you that there's a keynote address at 4:30 in here by Aaron O'Shea. And then tomorrow there's a Sigma Psi luncheon address by Lauren Ann Metzges, whose title actually is Watching a Virus at Work, Correlated Cryofluorescence and Cryo-Electron Microscopy of Influenza Virus Fusion. Quite amazing techniques and things. So I'm going to, first I have to thank a number of people. I want to thank our administrative assistant, Kelly DeForest, without whom this could not have happened. She took care of lots of the minutiae, the logistics, all sorts of things, and was absolutely wonderful. And then, of course, Professor Jameson, without whom this would not have been pulled off. I want to thank them. And then regrets from President McCartney, who wanted to be here, but is at a Seven Sisters meeting instead, and wishes us all the best. But she is co-sponsoring all the events along with the Sigma Psi, Smith College chapter of Phi Beta Kappa, the Smith College chapter of Sigma Psi, the research, scientific research honorary society, and the Office of Alumni Relations. So I'm going to give very brief bios of everyone so that you could actually ask questions of our panelists. So let me start at this end with Aaron O'Shea, class of '88 at Smith. Yeah, okay. Went on, got her PhD at MIT, went through a series of postdocs, whatnot, was a faculty member at UCSF, then was spirited away by Harvard and the Broad, and then went to HHMI and is now president of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Last May, it was my great pleasure also to be with Erin when she received an honorary degree from Smith. So that was fabulous. Then Dr. Beverly Mitchell, class of '65, okay, went on to Harvard for an MD. Went through all sorts of other things and whatnot, and is now director of the Stanford Cancer Center and a Smith medalist in '06. Then we have Lauren Ann Metzges, class of depending, okay, '08 as an undergraduate, and then she received her master's here as well in class of 10, went on to Yale for graduate school, and is now at the Medical Research Laboratory of Molecular Biology, Medical Research Council Laboratory of Molecular Biology in the UK, doing a postdoc, and soon will be going to Caltech for another postdoc. And then, last but not least, Dr. Megan Nunez, Smith class of '96, got her PhD at Caltech, taught at Mount Holyoke for a while, and is now at Wellesley College on the faculty there. And so that's a brief introduction, and I wish I could talk more about everyone, but I can't because I want you to be able to have time to ask whatever questions you'd like. The prompt I've given them is they all, one way or another, mostly, were biochemistry majors. And how they got to where they are from Smith and the biochemistry major at Smith and how it helped. So, no further ado, I open it up to you and to our panelists.
So, because all of you went on to get an advanced degree and a doctorate or a PhD or an MD, I was wondering, I've heard that there's an extremely steep learning curve from undergrad going into graduate school, and I'm interested in a PhD specifically, so for those of you who did go on to pursue a PhD, what was the hardest part of that learning curve and the biggest difference between undergrad and grad school in terms of what you're expected to know or how you learn things?
Well, I didn't get a PhD, so I can maybe had they had an MD PhD degree at the time I graduated, I would definitely have done that. And I think there is a big learning curve when you go into the laboratory after, even though this is just a beautiful facility, all of a sudden you have to think about your own experiments, your own ideas, and take those forward. So I think it's a challenge, but it sounds like you're going to be extremely well prepared for it. So I'll let those who actually got PhDs talk to you more specifically.
I think when you're doing a PhD, there's a lot of sort of shapelessness to it that is very different from when you're an undergraduate and the term starts here and it ends here and there are 3 midterms and a final and you do these things and you know exactly what's expected of you because it's laid out for you. And then when you do a PhD, it's sort of like, well, here's an idea for a project. Why don't you go see where that goes? And it needs to go somewhere if you want to ever get out of here. But I don't know where that's going to be. And so it's a little scary. But it's also really invigorating because you're going somewhere nobody's ever been before and you're doing things that are new. And sometimes you're the first person who's ever done that thing. And so it's really exciting.
I think also, so I came from a biochemistry background and then did a PhD in a program that was for physical and engineering biology. And so I completely didn't have the background for any of it, really. I mean, I never took anything beyond Calc 1 here. And, it's a little daunting to completely change fields if you end up doing that for your PhD. But at the same time, I think that a lot of us here do have the experience of jumping into something where we don't have a lot of background and making it work. So I think it's scary, but I think you also really have the tools that you need more than you realize coming from a place like this.
Kind of on that note, in PhDs in like related fields, but fields that are different enough that you might not have all the background, how was the application process for that and getting it difficult to make that transition?
You have to look at sort of how the programs are structured, I think. So for me, I looked for programs that had equal numbers of biologists and physicists, roughly. And that was very helpful because then we all had different backgrounds and we could teach each other. Yeah, you just have to kind of pick something where you think there's an open door.
So I did a PhD in chemistry, actually, so I was slowly migrating from, I started out a biology major and then became a biochem major, and then I did a PhD in chemistry. So when I applied to graduate school, I applied with my biochem GRE scores, and they knew I didn't have all the classes, so the first year I took a couple of extra classes. But it really was, I think in the end, it was an asset. In the group I was in, I was the most biological person in a group full of chemists. And so there were things I knew how to do that no one else knew how to do. Hey, we're going to express this gene in E. coli and grow up some protein. And everyone else would turn sort of green when you said that. And they'd be like, I know how to do that thing. I know how to do that. And then they knew how to do all these things I didn't know how to do. But it was okay. The biochem program here is broad enough that you can go so many different places and you have a lot of foundation to take it in a different way.
So if I'm allow that. Well, just sort of bouncing off that, I mean, more, I think my question is more what you found most valuable about your Smith education that helped you when you left, and what now, as in your fields, you see as maybe sort of something critical students should think about taking to help them in the transition of where biochemistry and medicine is right now.
So I can say independent study was the best thing I got out of this. I had my own project, my own lab, which was in a dark basement by myself, measuring tension in limulus crab muscle. So I can't say that experience was wonderful, but the whole idea, the whole idea of having a project and having to actually think it through pretty independently, because my advisor was quite busy doing other things, and then writing a thesis. I thought that was terrific, and that carried through the rest of my career.
I'll second that. I'd say that I agree. That was the more important than all the classes was the research experience and getting this sense of, working independently and without sort of, a formula, a recipe to follow. That sort of uncertainty that Megan talked about, I definitely got some of that here, and that's what really doing research and being in a PhD program is like, and that served me well.
About the future.
I think the one thing I really wish I had taken here that I didn't, and I always regret it, is coding, some sort of computer science. So I had to learn it on the go, and that was difficult.
So we got like a couple PhDs and an MD up here. What would you say are the like pros and cons of PhD versus MD? Or if you have any colleagues who've done PhD, MDs, how does that affect your career?
So MD, PhD is the long way around, I'll put it that way. It's a very long training process. But that said, what you get out of it, I think, is an understanding of human physiology, biology, so that your research might be directed toward problems that relate to medicine. But short of that, I think the PhD experience certainly gives you the same kind of in-depth research experience that you need for anything. It's just really a question of whether the medical relevance is important to your thought process of what you want to do. I think the MD adds in that respect. But the research ultimately ends up being not dissimilar. Maybe from HHMI's perspective, you could talk about
I mean,
that.
I think in general, to me, this is about whether you want to, see patients or not. I mean, I think a big reason to go to medical school is if you want to treat patients. I mean, that's like, by definition, you can't do that if you're just a PhD. So to me, that's like the primary driver. And yes, an added benefit is you certainly get a perspective on human biology and medicine that is very difficult to get if you do a PhD alone. But, for me, I chose PhD alone because I knew I wanted to be a scientist. And, that's training to be a scientist. That's the reality. MD, PhD certainly is an option, but as Bev says, it's a very long haul. And I think also the training has gotten more complicated over the years. There's I think less time now in medical school to allow people to do research, and less time during training, residency and internship. There's less time for doing research and more pressure to see patients. And that's not a knock on the MD. It's just I think the system has evolved to this point where it's become much more difficult for people who go the traditional MD only route to end up doing research. Some of them do, but it is much more difficult than it used to be. It used to be that many of the top scientists came from training in medicine only. And that is really not so much happening anymore.
Hi, this is a question for all of you. You had said that if you could do it all again, you wished you had taken a coding class. So I'd like to ask all of you if you could do it all again. And please feel free to add to your original answer. What would you do differently here at Smith?
If I could do it again, I would take more classes not in science, actually. I think I took as many science classes as I could squeeze into my schedule, and I loved it and nerded out, and it was great. But, then I went on to be a scientist and do science for the entire rest of my life, and my opportunity to take an anthropology class evaporated, right? And so I wish I had actually taken advantage of the liberal arts environment to take more other things that I wasn't ever going to have a chance to do later. I especially wish I had followed up on my language skills, and really, because I think being truly fluently bilingual is something that I wish I was, and I no longer am.
Well, I'm not sure that I can think of any single thing. I had a number of classes outside of sciences that I really enjoyed. By the same token, I was really taken by the sciences and wanted to take as many of those courses as I could. So I was pretty happy with my career. I think, again, this research experience, I would never have given up for something else. I spent the summer in Woods Hole doing research, and that was an unbelievable experience. I mean, there were scientists from all over the country and world to interact with, to go to lectures. So that opportunity gave me a huge advance that I never would have had otherwise. So I can't think of any one thing.
I'm tempted to say the same thing Megan said, but in reality, I feel like Bev feels. I had a great experience here. I wish I could have done more and had more liberal arts classes and all that, but at the end of the day, I got a great education here. I was given the freedom and flexibility to take what I wanted, which was primarily science and mathematics, and at that stage in my life, that was the right thing for me to do. It was really what I wanted to do, and I left feeling here, I told the students this morning, like, with the feeling I could do anything and succeed at it. And that was a very powerful thing. And so for me, I wouldn't change anything, not a thing. I'm so happy with what I got out of spending 4 years here. It was great.
I have a question. It's kind of open to everyone. Were there certain challenges that you faced as you started your career? And if so, how did you overcome them? And do you have any advice for people like myself who are graduating in May and are going to kind of spit out into the world?
I mean, I think there are challenges at every step that you don't see coming. And I just recently had my 20th last year. And one of the things that was so fun about it was to see where all the different things my classmates were doing, and by so many different paths, because life takes weird, twisty, different paths that you just don't see coming. And that's okay. I mean, that's the way it's going to be. And so I was actually inspired to see how many people had started out doing this, but then it didn't work out, and they fell in love with this, and they're, sometimes tragedy, sometimes challenges, sometimes just finding a new way. But that's the way life is, and so it's okay if it seems like you don't have a plan right now, and it's not super clear, because that just happened. So I taught for 10 years at Mount Holyoke College, and I loved every minute of it. But I had a very long commute, and I was away from my children way too much. And so one day I just said, I have to leave the job that I love. And I was lucky that I had a friend at Wellesley who I talked to and said, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. Do you have any ideas? Please help me. And he said, well, send in an application and, we're looking for somebody who isn't you, but maybe something will happen. And it did. And it did. And so I wound up moving, and, I didn't see it coming that I would walk away from a job I loved, but I walked into a new job I do love, so it's okay.
So I guess for me, most of my challenges were actually at the beginning, because I was a music major who dropped out of college and et cetera, and I just came back and started the 100 levels as a junior. And so I guess for me, once I got into science, things were actually more smooth, but I learned that the most important thing was really talking to people, talking to my professors, really, asking for advice and just not being afraid to just take a risk and jump into something because I was curious.
So my initial challenge was moving from Smith to Harvard Medical School. That was a big transition and took a lot of time and to work through the fact that I felt like I didn't belong there. And that was, back in the dark ages when there were not many women in the medical school. So there's a lot of differences. But I'd say it just, at the beginning, it's not totally easy. You just have to, persist, and things work out. And I've subsequently moved from from universities to different universities. All of those impose their own challenge. So change is never easy, but it turns out in the end, it really is a great growth experience. And I think certainly going to medical school was that.
I think I feel like, I don't know that I had anything I would say is a great challenge, but no, really, I felt like, things after Smith went well for me. But I think what's most important at that stage, right after, is really spend the time to figure out what you love to do, what makes you happy. Because in the end, you can certainly change things in your career, and I think many of us have. But what's most important is that you be doing what you love to do, because then it doesn't seem like work. And then all these little obstacles that come along, they don't seem so bad. Sure, you'll have periods where, change is difficult, where there's change and where it's difficult, but if you know why you're doing what you're doing, it makes a huge difference. And sometimes it just takes some time to figure that out, what the right thing is for you. What makes you fulfilled, what, makes you happy, right? And that's not always easy to know right after college. It's really not. But, and so it's important to try things and to really talk to people and figure that out. To me, that's the most important thing.
So with that said, would you say, like, at some point early on, did you say, I'm going to be president of
No, but, I think I knew, even early in graduate school, I knew I wanted to be a professor. I enjoyed, teaching. I loved research. I loved the sort of academic life of intellectual curiosity. And I knew that's what I wanted. And so, early on, that's what I did. And I spent more than 20 years as a faculty member before I still have a research lab, but before I took on an administrative role, and there were warm-ups in academia. I took leadership positions at UCSF and at Harvard, in the departments and centers that I was associated with. And through those experiences, I realized that there was impact I could have on science that was greater than the impact I could have just being a professor. And and getting back to the previous question, I think, I've known for a long time since I was a student that what I care most about is making a big impact, making positive change. Like, that's what motivates me. And it can be in different areas, but that's what I really care about. And when I realized that I had some skills in, leadership that could allow me to do something greater than what I could do with my own research lab alone, I took those opportunities as they came. So it wasn't like a grand master plan from the beginning, but the part about being a professor for sure was. I mean, that, and I enjoyed every minute of that.
I have a question. So how did you start taking initiative of your research? How did you figure out the area that you were really interested in? For example, how did you choose circadian rhythm?
Yeah.
How did you start taking initiative from following the
Yeah.
PI?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And that's not an easy thing to answer, and it's not like I'm special in this regard. I think this is something that happens to everybody. If you have a good advisor, like graduate school advisor, they encourage you to try out ideas, right? By encouraging you to think about various ideas and try them out in a sort of verbal, discussion. And sometimes, and you might say, well, how do I even get started? Well, like if I have students who can't get started, I try to suggest some areas, but don't give them the answer. Don't give them what I think is the answer. I mean, there is no real answer, but, and help the student just get started thinking about what are interesting questions, and then defending why they think the question is interesting and how they would go about answering. And, this is a subjective thing, right? What is interesting, right? At the end of the day, sometimes some of the things I've worked on, people would have said from the beginning, that's crazy. Why do you think that would turn out interesting? And some of the most interesting things fell into that category. So some of this is, in the eye of the beholder and in what you can actually figure out. At the end of the day, like science is about, research is about figuring out, like Megan said, things we don't know, okay? And explaining why that's fascinating and interesting. Oh, it's great if it has medical relevance, but if it doesn't, like what I talked about this morning, it got nothing to do with that. It's still interesting, and I think you can see why it's fascinating. It tells us something about the way in which the world we live in works, the natural world, like living things that we don't understand everything about. So that's a really good question you ask, but yeah, you need a good mentor to get started. It's now some students come with just an exceptional ability to pick something interesting and then to really pick an interesting question and then to just unravel it. Some of this is a little bit of luck, okay? But when it's done repeatedly by somebody, that's no longer luck. That's, some people have some intuition about this, but it can be developed over time. And yeah, but you ask, I mean, that's sort of the key to a lot of research. Identifying a good question, something that 3 million people aren't also trying to answer, something that can be answered, I want to know how the brain works too, but I mean, seriously, So it's a really good question. And yeah.
I think there can be a lot of serendipity as well. So if I look at the research that I work on now and sort of backtrack, how did I get to this place? I actually started my sophomore year with the 5 College lecture. And so the 5 College lecture that year was given by Jackie Barton. And I went and saw her talk and I said, wow, she's awesome and I want to go work for her. And I did. That's what I did my PhD with. And that, the research I do now is derived on those very first interests. And if I had just that night decided to do something different and not show up for that lecture, my whole life would be totally different. Right? I was captivated by DNA. I would have worked with somebody on DNA. But that one lecture, I just thought, I still have the flyer, actually, for that. That one lecture. And it was just an accident.
I think the other thing to say is that, and this came up before, I've worked on a lot of different problems, like things don't even resemble one another. And I think that's the other important thing to get out of, part of your time here at Smith, and also in graduate school, if that's the route you choose. Graduate school is about like asking and answering questions. And it's not about like, you got to learn this stuff for this area and this other stuff for this. Yeah, you need some of that, but here at Smith, you should learn how to learn. And so if you need to learn something new, you have the skills to learn something new. Don't be afraid of that. Like learning what's already known about something, or learn how to program, or learn how to this, you can do all that. And in graduate school, you want to learn how to solve problems. Ask and answer questions where people don't already know the answer. And if you really learn that, you can apply that to all different kinds of problems. And you can change from one problem to another. And in fact, one of the greatest things about being a scientist in academia is exactly that. You can decide you want to change. You want to work on something else. And that, how fun is that, right? Just like follow your curiosity, right? You just have to explain to whoever's going to give you money why it's interesting. I mean, that's also like part of the art of being a scientist. But let's leave that aside. Really, at the root of it, it's like, that's the coolest thing. You can change. So you should have a toolkit that allows you to solve problems in a whole bunch of different areas. You don't have to be stuck in one little thing.
How did you deal with, I think a lot of us, like a lot of students who are graduating are very much like unsure, what direction they want to go. And I'm sure you guys went through that too. And this is for anyone. How did you deal with the discomfort of not knowing? How did you become comfortable with what you don't know? And what steps did you take that helped you sort of figure out which direction to go?
So I just want to emphasize, I think, what several people have said, that there's a lot of luck in where you end up, and seriously, and who your mentors are. And I think that kind of support mechanism, that kind of reassurance, once you find the people whom you admire, whom you're working with, that really facilitates your knowing what area you want to work in. And it does change from time to time, and various points of your career, the need for that kind of mentorship changes, but it's always there. And I think that really helps from my standpoint. But this business of mapping out exactly what you want to do and where you're going to end up doesn't work in my experience.
But I think that's the good news. You don't have to have it all mapped out right now, because it's going to change in ways you don't foresee, and you fall in love with new things, or there are whole different paths you haven't seen before. And so, I think I did want to be a professor for a while, but there were, definitely points in graduate school where I had to stop and say, is this really what I want? And do I want to be a professor at a big school, or do I want to be at a small school, or do I maybe not want to do that at all? Maybe I could go into biotech and do something different. And so I think exactly that, having people you trust who you can talk to, and you already have other Smithies to talk to. So my best friend in my class went to graduate school at UCLA, which from Caltech was less than 10 miles away, which meant in those days it was not a long distance call. I know this is not a concept that is familiar to you guys, but to those of us who remember a world before cell phones, this is a big deal, because I could just call her from lab and we could talk about what was going on, and we're still, we still text each other. And so to some of the friends that you make here, you will be able to rely on for a very long time.
I know. Well, I'm sorry to point like this, but you had a question, and I feel bad because you're in an inconspicuous spot.
My question is, how relevant was your undergraduate research experience to what you did in your PhD, for those of you who had a PhD? Because I know Dr. O'Shea this morning told us that she did something extremely relevant to what she did in PhD that really helped her, but like not everyone has the chance to do something that's extremely relevant. For example, I was thinking about engineering, for example, but I may not have the chance in Smith to engage in certain relevant techniques.
Mhm.
I'm always surprised. I've worked on several different projects, and they weren't all always immediately relevant, but over the years, that familiarity with a variety of different techniques and fields has always been really surprising to me. Something will pop up and I'll think, oh yeah, I remember I did that, one summer when I did that, when I was at the Mayo Clinic and I did that thing and I did, and so even if it doesn't feel relevant to you right now, you might be surprised that things will bubble back up.
Yeah.
And I think the more different things you know and the more different perspectives you have, the better that is.
So I also have actually done completely unrelated things for undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc, and they really do not bear any relation to each other, almost. But honestly, as an undergrad, you learn how to do research, and that's more important than anything else, is just learning how to ask a question and how to answer a question. Everything else is secondary.
And I'll also add that science is changing so fast that a lot of what you learn now you'll find not as relevant. I hate to say this. But that's why this thought process is so important, because science itself is moving at an incredible rate. So I think your ability to take a problem and think through is the most important thing you can learn.
Okay.
How do you maintain a perspective that allows you to be on the edge of innovation when you are looking at your field of study? Do you read journals? Is there, how do you figure out something that catches your eye and continuously expose yourself? I know Smith has its own research and own perspectives, but how do you reach beyond that to figure out if something else might be more relevant to, or stumble upon it by chance in order to develop your research further for the future?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I think we'd probably have some overlapping set of answers to that question, but you touched on some of them. I think we try to read broadly. We go on seminar trips and talk with other scientists in different fields. That's extremely valuable. We go to scientific meetings to expose ourselves to other areas. Those are like the big standard things you do as an academic. In my job now, it's like a smorgasbord of amazing science. I have 7 science meetings a year with some of the 300 of the top scientists, biologists in the country come and talk about all different areas of their, talk about their own research. So I have a lot of contact like that now. That certainly influences my thinking, for sure. And that's similar to going to these meetings that I talked about. So I would say, I would say those are the major ways.
I think the culture in which you're working is also important. If you're really looking to be innovative, that has to be encouraged by your environment. So I have to say Silicon Valley is like, if you're not doing something out of the box, you're, old hat. Whereas by prior institutions, as long as you were making steady progress, that was great.
That's a good point.
So I think that is, whether or not you're encouraged to think in an innovative way is important.
Someone over, yeah.
I'm wondering what non-science experience or thing that you picked up along the way really help to lead you where you are and help you maintain your job right now?
I think being a good writer is one of the most important things.
That's good.
I mean, it's
We
one
all
of those
agree.
huge advantages, I think, of going to a liberal arts college. That skill will serve you well forever, because you can be a great scientist, but if you can't communicate it well, if you can't write a grant clearly and you can't write a paper clearly, then you're stuck, right? And so that's one of those places where I think that we all have a big advantage.
I'm going to jump onto that and say another part of communication is public speaking. And so, I was in music performance, and just getting over stage fright was a huge deal. So that can also tie in with that.
I agree with both of those. Very important.
You guys all talked about how mentorship is important. How did you guys find mentors? Did you just stumble upon them because of luck?
I think it's very hard, again, to think, unless you've got an area in which you really think you want to work, and then looking for the best, and talking to people. I mean, if you're looking for a laboratory, when you get your PhD, you look for an advisor, and you have to pick labs and do rotations. And a lot of it is your experience and then talking to other students, and it's sort of an iterative process. I don't think there's an easy solution to, this is the person who's going to be my mentor. And a lot of people are more comfortable being advisors than other people, and those people get known by your colleagues, and I think that really helps.
Yeah, I'd pick up on what Bev said, that I always advise students when they're trying to pick a mentor, like an advisor. Now, mentor can mean a lot of different things, but for example, a PhD advisor or research advisor, say you're a medical student doing research. I advise people to look at the record the person has of training others, right? And for example, if you're a medical student wanting to do research, I would ask about the record of the person in helping to mentor medical students who are interested in, say, 1 or 2 years of research experience. And the same for the PhD. I look for people who have demonstrated success in training people and being a good mentor. Now, some brand new people who don't have a record, brand new faculty, can also be great mentors. So I think, people, I worked for somebody who was a brand new faculty member, and that was a great experience. So like Bev said, I think there's no recipe here. You gotta, it's a two-way project to find a good mentor, meaning, you have to be a good mentee, and you want somebody who's going to be a good mentor. It has to be a good match. It's like any relationship.
I think, oh my gosh, there's so many things to say about, you could just talk about mentors and for like a whole panel. All right, I'll start with like my Anne of Green Gables moment, right? So, she's always finding kindred spirits in unexpected places. And I think that that's sometimes true in life. Like you meet people who are kind and smart and can give you good advice and can listen well. And you meet them all over the place. And I think one of the most important mentors for me actually was David. And so I'm just like not going to get all weepy or anything. But I think that I was, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life when I started here, and I didn't even know if I liked science. And him intervening in my life and saying, you should do some research, and hey, you're good at this chemistry thing, really changed the whole path of my life. And he was a good mentor for me the whole time I was here and beyond. But through my life, I've collected other mentors who, just people who I could talk to and who I continue to reach out to at different times. And now as I'm getting older, I'm collecting mentees and sort of going the other direction and sharing good advice with, first it was students, and now I'm getting to the age that the junior faculty, I take them out to lunch, and so it goes around.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that our time has run out. I want to thank everybody on the panel.